There is a kind of education that life gives you without your consent, a curriculum that no school teaches, no mentor outlines, and no book can prepare you for. It is not written in language, but in experiences that challenge your sense of control. It's the invisible syllabus of the soul, the lessons that appear disguised as disappointment, loss, and delay. When life keeps disappointing you, it's not because you're failing at something external. It's because you're being invited into a deeper level of awareness. The soul's curriculum doesn't reward you for how fast you learn or how much you achieve. It rewards you for how deeply you understand. And understanding rarely comes in comfort. It comes through contrast. It comes through confusion. It comes through those quiet hours when nothing makes sense and you're forced to sit in the ruins of what you thought your life would be. Disappointment is the language through which the soul speaks when the ego refuses to listen. The ego wants progress, validation, and visible results. It wants timelines and guarantees. But the soul wants truth, integration, and authenticity. It wants you to know who you are beneath the performance. So when you ignore that inner truth for too long, life begins to remove everything that keeps you attached to illusion. It dismantles your false certainties, not to destroy you, but to remind you that who you are is not defined by what you have or who you please. Every time something falls apart, something ancient inside you awakens. Every heartbreak, rejection, or failure becomes a page in the textbook of your becoming. The outer world may see it as defeat, but your inner world recognizes it as initiation. You are being initiated into the deeper architecture of your own being, where meaning doesn't come from what you gain, but from what you discover within yourself. When there's nothing left to hold on to, the unseen curriculum of the soul teaches patience before it grants peace. It teaches surrender before it offers clarity. It teaches humility before it allows wisdom to bloom. You are made to sit in the classroom of uncertainty, where the only instructions are silence and trust. It's here that you begin to see how the most painful experiences are also the most precise teachers. Life doesn't use comfort to awaken you. It uses friction, because friction reveals what's real and what's not. Every disappointment carries a hidden assignment to look beyond appearances, to question the story you've told yourself, to uncover the wound behind the want. Perhaps what you wanted was never truly yours, or perhaps it was too small for the magnitude of who you are becoming. The curriculum doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what will expand you. It strips away what you think you need, so you can finally recognize what actually nourishes your soul. Growth in this hidden schooling is not measured in milestones, but in awareness. You don't graduate by mastering external success. You graduate by remembering yourself. You begin to see that the very experiences you prayed to avoid were the ones that shaped the strength you secretly needed. The disappointments that once felt cruel begin to reveal their precision, their necessity. They were not accidents, they were assignments. They arrived exactly on time, with exactly the pressure required to turn your resistance into realization. And so, through every unanswered prayer and every closed door, the unseen curriculum continues. You are not being tested for the sake of punishment, but for preparation, preparing you to hold greater truths, deeper peace, and a more unshakable sense of who you are when everything external disappears. There comes a moment in every human life when the structure of who you thought you were begins to crumble. The identity you've built, the achievements, the image, the control, begins to feel too heavy, too fragile, too false to sustain. This moment, though terrifying, is not a breakdown in the true sense. It is an initiation. It is the collapse of the ego, the shattering of everything superficial so that the authentic self can begin to emerge. The ego is a beautiful but limited construction. It's the mask that helps you navigate the world, the identity that organizes your story. It wants security, approval, and predictability. It wants to know who it is and to be recognized for it. But over time, this structure becomes rigid. It resists change. It attaches to roles, labels, and expectations that no longer fit the deeper evolution of your being. When life starts to challenge that structure, when loss, rejection, or failure arrives, it's not life being cruel, it's life demanding truth. It's the invitation to die to who you were so you can be reborn into who you really are. Ego collapse feels like losing control because that's exactly what it is. The illusions of certainty begin to dissolve. You no longer know what's coming next. The career that once defined you feels hollow. The relationships that once anchored you begin to fall away. Even the beliefs that once gave you meaning start to lose their power. This disorientation is sacred. It is the threshold between the false self and the real one. It is not punishment, it's initiation into depth. In these moments, your old identity fights to survive. It clings to the familiar narratives that once kept you safe. It tells you that you're failing, that you've lost your way. But what's really happening is that your consciousness is expanding beyond the boundaries of that story. The person you were built from survival, the person you are becoming, is built from truth. The collapse of the ego is the space between those two realities, the death of one world and the quiet birth of another. True transformation never comes through addition, it comes through subtraction. The ego wants to add more success, more validation, more recognition. But the soul wants to strip away. It wants to remove every false layer that keeps you from seeing yourself clearly. When the ego collapses, everything unnecessary begins to fall away. You lose the need to impress, to prove, to control. You stop seeking significance through comparison. What remains is something raw, real, and unguarded, something that doesn't need to perform because it simply is. This collapse can feel like emptiness at first. You might mistake it for depression or despair, but underneath that emptiness is a profound stillness, a silence where truth begins to speak. It's in that silence that you begin to sense the difference between what you thought you wanted and what your soul actually needs. You start to realize that your old identity was never the enemy. It was just a temporary shelter. It helped you survive the earlier chapters of your story, but survival and awakening are not the same thing. The collapse marks the crossing from one to the other. The initiation that follows the collapse doesn't promise comfort. It demands surrender. It asks you to sit inside the unknown without forcing an answer. It asks you to trust the dismantling process even when it feels like everything familiar is being taken away. Because in truth, what's being taken away are the illusions that kept you from freedom. When the ego collapses, what remains is awareness, awareness that doesn't depend on title, on image, or on outcome. Awareness that doesn't need to be defended, awareness that simply observes the rise and fall of everything without needing to control it. This awareness is not new, It was always there, buried beneath the noise of striving and self-definition. The collapse doesn't create it, it reveals it. And so the ego's collapse is not the end of you, it's the beginning of consciousness recognizing itself through you. It is the sacred dismantling that clears the way for something vast, unconditioned, and profoundly real to emerge from within. Pain has a strange way of revealing what peace conceals. When everything is calm, we move through life on the surface, believing we understand ourselves. But the moment pain enters, something ancient and buried begins to stir. Pain is not simply suffering, it is an unveiling. It exposes the shadow, the hidden realm of emotions, instincts, and truths that your conscious self has long denied. And within that shadow lies a gift, one that only reveals itself when you stop running from what hurts and start listening to what it's trying to show you. The shadow is the part of you that holds everything you've rejected in order to be accepted. The anger you suppress to appear kind, the grief you hide to seem strong, the fear you disguise as control. Society teaches you to hide these aspects, to present only the version of yourself that feels safe and likable. But what you repress doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits in silence until life creates the conditions for it to surface, often through pain, disappointment, or loss. That's when the shadow begins to speak, not through words, but through emotions that won't be ignored. When pain arrives, it tears open the neat fabric of identity you've spent years stitching together. It brings to the surface everything unresolved, everything unloved, everything misunderstood. You may interpret it as chaos or breakdown, but in truth, it's revelation. Pain is the psyche's way of saying, you can't evolve while pretending this part of you doesn't exist. It is a mirror that reflects back the fragments of yourself that have been cast into darkness. And if you have the courage to face that reflection, what once felt like torment begins to turn into power. The shadow's gift is self-knowledge. It teaches you through contrast. By confronting what you fear, you rediscover what you value. By facing what you hate, you reclaim what you've lost. By acknowledging what you've denied, you retrieve the pieces of yourself that make you whole. Every wound you carry holds an opposite force. Anger hides passion, sorrow hides compassion, fear hides sensitivity, and shame hides the longing to belong. These are not curses, but energies waiting to be integrated. Pain is the doorway through which this transformation becomes possible. To reject pain is to reject the initiation it brings. That's why avoidance only deepens suffering. When you numb, distract, or rationalize your pain away, you also numb the very power it's trying to awaken. True healing begins when you allow yourself to feel without judgment. When you let the anger rise, the tears fall, the confusions swirl, not to indulge them, but to release the energy that's been trapped in silence. The shadow doesn't demand your perfection, it demands your honesty. As you begin to face what you once feared, something profound happens, compassion emerges. You begin to understand that your pain was never your enemy, it was your teacher. The parts of yourself you once exiled start to come home, bringing with them the strength, creativity, and an authenticity you once lost trying to appear acceptable. The light that emerges from this reconciliation isn't the blinding light of denial, it's the soft, grounded light of integration. The deeper you go into your pain, the clearer you become about your purpose. Pain burns away the illusions of who you thought you had to be and leaves behind the essence of who you really are. It sharpens your awareness of what truly matters and deepens your capacity to connect with others in their own suffering. You begin to see that pain isn't something that happens to you, but something that happens for you, to initiate you into wisdom, depth, and empathy that cannot be learned through comfort. The shadow gift hidden in pain is the return to wholeness. It is the rediscovery of your forgotten self through the very experiences you once tried to escape. Pain, when faced consciously, becomes the alchemy of transformation, turning rejection into resilience, loss into insight, and darkness into the raw material from which your truest self is formed. Transformation does not follow the rhythm of your plans. It follows the rhythm of your readiness. Life moves in cycles that are invisible to the rational mind, and though the ego demands immediate progress, the soul evolves through seasons. There are periods of blossoming where everything flows easily, and there are periods of barrenness where nothing seems to move no matter how hard you try. The latter often feels like punishment or failure, but it is neither. It is the sacred pause between endings and beginnings, the gestation period where invisible roots are growing stronger beneath the surface before the next chapter begins to bloom. The timing of transformation is never random. It unfolds according to the maturity of your inner world, not the impatience of your outer ambition. When you want to move faster than your consciousness can sustain, life applies friction to slow you down. What you perceive as delay is often protection. The universe refuses to grant what would destroy your peace before you've built the strength to carry it. The doors that remain closed, the relationships that end too soon, the opportunities that don't arrive, all of them are synchronized with a wisdom that understands what your mind cannot. There is a natural intelligence woven into every phase of growth. Just as a seed must remain buried before it can sprout, you too must endure seasons of stillness before expansion can occur. The human mind resists this because it craves results, but the soul understands that transformation cannot be rushed. It happens when insight has ripened, when lessons have been absorbed, and when the old identity has dissolved enough to make space for the new one. Trying to force transformation before its time only creates confusion and exhaustion, because the structure of who you are still needs to disassemble before something truer can take shape. In the waiting, you confront your deepest attachments, your attachment to certainty, validation, and progress. You begin to see how much of your motivation was built on fear of being left behind, fear of insignificance, fear of not knowing. The period of delay exposes these fears so they can be released. Without this cleansing, transformation would simply replicate the same old patterns under a different disguise. Waiting, therefore, is not wasted time, it is refinement. It's where clarity begins to replace desperation, where patience begins to replace control. The timing of transformation also honors the collective rhythm of the world around you. You are not transforming in isolation. You are transforming within a web of interconnected lives, each evolving at their own pace. Sometimes you are ready, but those tied to your journey are not. Sometimes others are ready, but you still need to learn. The universe waits until the threads align. What appears to be stagnation on the surface is often divine coordination behind the scenes, arranging circumstances so that when movement returns, it carries lasting change rather than temporary relief. During these still phases, The temptation to give up or to force outcomes becomes strongest. Yet it is in precisely this between space that your consciousness expands. You learn to surrender the illusion of control and to trust the unfolding of life itself. You start to understand that transformation is not an event, but a process. Not a single leap, but a series of subtle shifts that gradually rewire your perception. You realize that the pain of waiting is simply the discomfort of your old self dissolving while your new self is still forming. When the time finally comes, it will not require struggle. True transformation arrives quietly, as if it had been preparing for lifetimes. The lessons you once resisted suddenly make sense. The relationships that left you in confusion begin to reveal their meaning. The delays you cursed begin to show their purpose. Every slow season, every silent night, every unanswered prayer becomes a thread in the tapestry of your awakening. Transformation unfolds with the precision of nature, never early, never late, always in perfect alignment with the evolution of your soul. Resentment is a heavy anchor that keeps the soul tied to the past. It forms in the quiet spaces after disappointment. When something or someone didn't meet your expectation, when life didn't unfold according to your design, it begins as a bruise, a subtle bitterness that whispers, "I was wronged," but left unattended, that whisper grows into a narrative that blinds you to the deeper intelligence behind your pain. Resentment is the refusal to see meaning in what hurt you. Revelation begins the moment you decide to look again. When you live in resentment, your energy becomes trapped in resistance. Every memory that once felt alive becomes a closed door you keep knocking on. You replay conversations, reimagine outcomes, and unconsciously build an identity around the injustice you experienced. The mind loves resentment because it gives it something to hold on to, a story that explains the pain. But what resentment really holds on to is the illusion of control. It keeps you tied to the very thing you want to escape. The longer you grip the wound, the longer it defines you. Revelation doesn't begin when the situation changes. It begins when your perception does. When you begin to ask, "What is this showing me?" instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" The same pain that once imprisoned you begins to open a door. Every betrayal, every rejection, every closed path carries a hidden message. It points toward the expectations, attachments, and illusions that needed to be broken for something more authentic to rise in their place. Resentment blinds you to the lesson. Revelation helps you extract it. To move from resentment to revelation, you must be willing to step out of the role of the victim and step into the perspective of the observer. This doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means reclaiming the power it once stole from you. The observer doesn't deny the hurt. It witnesses it without identifying with it. From that vantage point, you start to see how even the people who wounded you were instruments in your awakening. They mirrored the boundaries you didn't yet know how to set, the worth you hadn't yet learned to claim, the truth you hadn't yet had the courage to live. Pain became the mirror through which your deeper self was reflected back to you. Resentment keeps your gaze fixed backward. Revelation turns your gaze inward. It asks you to confront not just what happened, but what it revealed about your own needs, fears, and desires. Perhaps the pain exposed a dependency you didn't know you had, or revealed how much of your identity was built on external validation. The revelation is rarely about the other person. It is about what in you was asking to evolve. Once this is seen, the emotional charge begins to dissolve. The same story that once made you angry begins to make you conscious. Forgiveness often grows naturally from this space, not because you decide to be kind, but because you finally understand. Forgiveness is the byproduct of revelation, the recognition that everyone, including you, acts from the level of awareness they possess at the time. When you see that, resentment loses its meaning. You stop demanding that the past be different and start receiving the wisdom it was always trying to give you. Revelation transforms pain into perspective. It shows that life was never punishing you, it was educating you. It was using contrast to guide you back to alignment, using disappointment to return you to authenticity. Every resentment you release becomes space for awareness to enter, and in that awareness, gratitude quietly begins to grow. You start to recognize that what once felt like betrayal was often redirection, that what once felt like loss was often liberation, and that what once felt like the end was simply the point where understanding finally began.